She had no bag, no phone, no one to call, just a baby she was fighting to keep and a husband who had already decided she didn't deserve to stay in the country where that baby was about to be born. In the spring of 2026, a woman named Amara Coleman walked through the doors of Grady Memorial Hospital in Atlanta, Georgia, 34 weeks pregnant, dehydrated, and completely alone. When the intake nurse asked for her emergency contact, Amara went quiet. Not because she couldn't think of one, but because every person she might have named was either an ocean away or had already been cut off by the man who called himself her husband. She sat in that hospital chair, belly swollen, hands folded, and said nothing, because saying nothing had become the only thing keeping her safe. Before we go any further, drop a comment and let us know where you're watching from. We'd genuinely love to hear from you. And if stories like this one matter to you, hit that subscribe button right now so you never miss what's coming next on this channel. Researchers and advocacy organizations have consistently documented that U.S. citizen abusers use immigration status as a deliberate tool of control, keeping non-citizen spouses trapped through fear and silence, with threats like, "I will get you deported, and if you leave, you will lose your children and be sent home." This is not a story about crossing a border illegally. Amara did everything right. She had a visa. She had a marriage certificate. She had a life she had built from scratch in a city that was supposed to be her fresh start. What she didn't have, what she didn't know she needed, was a way out that didn't require his permission. And by the time she understood the trap she was in, she was 8 months pregnant, legally flagged by immigration authorities, and living under the same roof as the man who had reported her. Here is what we know. Amara Coleman was a licensed practical nurse from Kingston, Jamaica. She was educated, driven, and by every account, a woman who had her life mapped out with precision. She did not come to America desperate. She came because she fell in love with a man who pursued her relentlessly, flew across the Caribbean twice to prove it, and stood beside her at an altar and made a promise in front of God and her family. What we also know is that by the time Amara was sitting alone in that Atlanta hospital, that same man had contacted federal immigration authorities and told them her marriage was a fraud. He did not do this in a moment of rage. He did not do this impulsively. He had been planning it. And that changes everything about how you understand what comes next. So before we go any further, there are 3 questions you need to hold on to as this story unfolds. The first, how does a woman with a legal visa, a legal marriage, and a legal right to be in this country end up flagged for deportation while carrying her husband's child? The second, when the abuse leaves no bruises and the abuser knows exactly how the immigration system works, what does a woman actually have to prove to be believed? And the third question is the one that will follow you long after this video ends. In 2025, a woman in Louisiana was placed in a detention center after her boyfriend, the man who had been abusing her, called the police and then contacted Immigration and Customs Enforcement and reported her status. She had done nothing wrong. So the question becomes, how many Derek Colemans are out there right now, and how many Amaras are sitting quietly in a hospital chair, saying nothing, because they have learned that silence is the only currency they have left? Amara Ose grew up in a 2-bedroom house in Kingston, Jamaica, the second of 4 children raised by a mother who worked double shifts at a textile factory and a father who drove a delivery truck 6 days a week. There was not a lot of money, but there was structure. There was expectation. And from the time Amara was 12 years old, she understood that the way out of a small life was through a door you built yourself. She studied. She tested. She earned her nursing license at 23 and spent the next 3 years working at a private clinic in Kingston, caring for mothers and newborns with the kind of steady hands that made her supervisors put her name forward for every continuing education opportunity that came through. Amara was not waiting to be rescued. She was building something. She met Derek Coleman in the summer of 2022 at a family friend's wedding in Miami. He was 41 years old, Atlanta-born, a real estate agent with a firm handshake and a laugh that filled whatever room he was standing in. He was the kind of man who remembered your drink order and asked follow-up questions about things you had mentioned 20 minutes earlier. He made Amara feel like the most important person in a room full of people.
Me?
She would
Avoid
later
you?
describe that
Never.
weekend as the
I was
first
just
time in her
admiring the
adult
decorations
life
from
she had
afar.
felt genuinely seen by someone who had nothing to gain from seeing her. That feeling is important, because it is exactly what Derek Coleman needed her to feel in order for everything else to work. He pursued her with a consistency that felt, At the time, like devotion. Video calls every evening. Flowers sent to her clinic. He flew to Kingston in October 2022 and again in January 2023. He met her mother. He sat at her family's table and ate curry goat and talked about his grandmother's cooking and his plans to expand his real estate business into property management. He was warm. He was present. He proposed in February 2023 in the same Kingston neighborhood where Amara had grown up, with her mother watching from the doorway. The wedding was held 4 months later. Amara's family filled the pews. Derek's side of the church was nearly empty. He told her his parents were unwell and could not travel. That was not true, but Amara did not know that yet. She entered the United States on a CR-1 spousal visa in the fall of 2023, what is known as a conditional green card, issued to foreign spouses of American citizens who have been married for less than 2 years. The word conditional is the part that matters. Under U.S. immigration law, if a spouse refuses to help remove the conditions on a green card, the non-citizen partner can apply independently, but they must prove the marriage was entered in good faith and that they were subjected to battery or extreme cruelty during the marriage. Derek knew this. He had looked it up. Amara, who was focused on building her new life, settling into Atlanta, and finding nursing work, had not looked it up. That asymmetry, one person understanding the legal architecture of a marriage and the other simply living inside it, is the foundation on which Derek Coleman built his entire system of control. The first year was quiet. Amara found work through a staffing agency, placing licensed nurses in outpatient clinics across the south side of Atlanta. She made friends slowly. A Haitian woman named Claudette who worked the same shift, a Jamaican couple from her church who had her over for dinner twice a month. She called her mother every Sunday. She was, by most visible measures, doing exactly what she had planned to do when she stood at that altar and said yes. She got pregnant in early 2025, and when she told Derek the news, he smiled. He held her. He said all the right things. But something in the house shifted that same week, so gradually that Amara would not be able to name it until much later. The allowance he gave her for groceries got smaller. The questions about where she had been got more frequent. And one evening in March 2025, when she came home 30 minutes later than expected after a shift ran long, Derek sat at the kitchen table in the dark and said nothing for 45 minutes. Just sat there, watching her move around the kitchen, saying absolutely nothing at all. The first time Derek said it out loud, Amara was standing at the kitchen sink washing dishes. It was a Tuesday evening in April 2025. She was 14 weeks pregnant. She had just told him she was not going to quit her nursing job, that the income mattered, that she needed the structure and the independence and the colleagues who made her feel like herself. Derek did not raise his voice. He did not throw anything. He walked to the counter, poured himself a glass of water, drank it slowly, and then said 4 words in a tone so flat it took her a moment to register them as a threat. He said, "I'll call immigration tomorrow." Then he rinsed his glass, set it on the drying rack beside her hands, and walked out of the kitchen. Amara stood at that sink for a long time after he left. The water was still running. What Derek understood, and what he was counting on Amara not fully understanding, was the specific legal leverage built into a conditional green card. Under U.S. immigration law, both spouses are required to jointly file to remove the conditions on a spousal green card. And without that joint filing, the non-citizen spouse is left in legal limbo. He had not just married Amara. He had positioned himself as the gatekeeper of her right to remain in the country where she was now pregnant, employed, and building a life. And in the spring of 2025, with the Trump administration's immigration enforcement expanding rapidly and deportation proceedings accelerating across the country, that threat carried a weight it might not have carried in a different political moment. Experts and activists on the ground were already documenting that abusers were using immigration status as a weapon of control and fear, and that victims were increasingly terrified to seek help. Derek did not invent this tactic. He inherited it from a long tradition of men who understood that a woman with uncertain legal standing is a woman who has very few places to run. The escalation did not happen all at once. It never does. Over the following months, Derek built what can only be described as an architecture of isolation, constructed so methodically that each individual piece looked, to anyone watching from the outside, like a reasonable choice. He suggested Amara cut back her hours at the clinic because of the pregnancy. When she resisted, He made the suggestion to her nursing agency directly, citing concern for her health, and her schedule was quietly reduced. He added himself as the primary account holder on their shared bank account and restructured her access to a weekly cash allowance, telling her it was for budgeting purposes. He drove her to every prenatal appointment and sat in the parking lot, timing how long she was inside. When her friend Claudette called one afternoon and Amara stepped into the bedroom to take the call, Derek stood outside the door. He did not knock. He simply stood there until she came out. By September 2025, Amara had stopped telling Claudette the truth about what was happening at home. Not because she didn't trust her, but because the last time she had said something, just a passing comment about feeling watched, Derek had brought it up at dinner 2 days later, word for word, in a tone that made clear he knew everything. She still does not know how. What she knew was that the circle of people she could speak freely to had been reduced, over 18 months, to almost no one. Her mother in Kingston still called every Sunday. Amara answered every call. She smiled through every conversation.
That soon.
She had become so practiced at performing
too.
normalcy that she
Yes, I
sometimes
feel
frightened
great, just a
herself
little
with how
tired
easy it had
sometimes.
become. She was 28 weeks pregnant. She was running out of time to figure out what to do before the baby arrived, and Derek had one more thing to hold over her. In November 2025, Derek stopped making threats. He started making calls. He contacted U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services and filed a formal claim stating that his marriage to Amara had been fraudulent, that she had entered into it solely for immigration purposes and had no genuine intention of building a life as his wife. This is a documented tactic. Research consistently identifies deportation threats and deliberate interference with a victim's ongoing immigration process as specific tools of coercive control used by abusive partners, designed to trap non-citizen spouses in fear and prevent them from seeking help. Derek's claim triggered a formal investigation. Amara, now 7 months pregnant, received a notice in the mail that her conditional green card status had been flagged and that her case was under review. She read that letter standing in her kitchen, alone, on a Wednesday afternoon. She read it 3 times. Then she folded it carefully, put it back in the envelope, and hid it in the lining of a winter coat at the back of her closet. Because Derek checked the mail every day, and she had learned not to let him see her react to anything. She found the phone number on a pamphlet tucked into the bottom of a paper bag of prenatal vitamins she had picked up at her OB's office. Georgia Coalition Against Domestic Violence. She memorized the number standing in the clinic bathroom. She did not write it down. She called it 4 days later from a gas station payphone 2 blocks from the clinic while Derek waited in the car outside. The line rang 6 times. Then it connected. And for the first time in 8 months, Amara Coleman told someone the truth. The woman on the other end of that call was named Sandra. She was a legal advocate with the Georgia Coalition Against Domestic Violence, and she had heard versions of Amara's story before. Not the same details, not the same man, but the same architecture. The controlled bank account, the monitored appointments, the threats delivered in a flat voice at the kitchen sink as though they were simply facts about the weather. Sandra did not rush Amara. She let her talk. And when Amara finished, Sandra said something that stopped her cold. She said, "You have more options than he wants you to believe." Then she explained something called a VAWA self-petition. And for the first time in 8 months, Amara Coleman felt something she had almost forgotten how to feel. She felt like there might be a door. The Violence Against Women Act, VAWA, is a federal law that allows immigrant survivors of abuse to petition for legal immigration status entirely on their own, without the knowledge or cooperation of their abusive spouse. USCIS defines extreme cruelty broadly under VAWA. It includes not just physical violence, but controlling behavior, psychological abuse, restricting access to money, monitoring communications, and using immigration status as a tool of control, including threatening deportation and refusing to file immigration petitions. On paper, what Derek had done to Amara qualified, clearly and completely. But here is where the story gets harder. A VAWA self-petition requires evidence of the abusive relationship, police reports, medical records, restraining orders, affidavits from family, friends, or professionals. And Derek Coleman, who understood systems the way a locksmith understands locks, had spent 18 months making sure there was almost nothing on paper. No police reports. No hospital records of injury. No text that crossed a legal line clearly enough to be useful. No witnesses who had seen anything specific enough to put in a sworn statement. What Amara had was her word, a half-faded bruise on her forearm from October that she had never photographed, and a letter from immigration authorities confirming that her own husband had filed a fraud claim against her. Sandra pulled every thread available. She contacted the domestic violence shelter in Decatur that had space for Amara. She referred her to an immigration attorney who worked VAWA cases pro bono. She documented their conversation. She began building what she could from what was there. But the clock was moving. Amara was 32 weeks pregnant, and Derek did not know any of this was happening. While Amara was quietly trying to assemble a legal case from fragments, Derek Coleman was doing something else entirely. He was building a story. He posted on social media about the difficulties of supporting a pregnant wife who was struggling to adjust to life in America. He told people at his church that he was worried about Amara's mental stability during the pregnancy. He mentioned to at least 3 people in his professional circle, this would come out later, that he was concerned she might try to take the baby back to Jamaica. He was not acting out of panic. He was constructing a narrative in advance, the same way you would prepare a defense before a charge has been filed. Attorneys who work these cases have documented that abusers with knowledge of the legal system are particularly dangerous. They use courts, documentation, and institutional access to control victims in ways that leave no physical evidence and are extremely difficult to disprove. Derek was not just abusing Amara. He was preparing to win. And then something happened that Derek had not planned for. Sandra, working through the Legal Advocate Network, located a woman named Renee. Renee was 34 years old, originally from Trinidad, and she had been in a relationship with Derek Coleman between 2018 and 2019. She had been in the United States on a work visa. She had never spoken publicly about why she left Atlanta. She had simply, in Derek's words to everyone who asked, disappeared from his life. When Sandra's colleague reached Renee by phone and explained why she was calling, Renee was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "I wondered when someone was finally going to call." What Renee knew, and what she was now willing to put in writing, changed the entire weight of Amara's case. Because Amara was not the first woman Derek Coleman had done this to. She was just the first one who hadn't run. Renee Williams had moved to Atlanta in the spring of 2018 on a 3-year work visa, hired by a logistics company headquartered in Buckhead. She met Derek Coleman 4 months after she arrived, at a neighborhood cookout hosted by a mutual acquaintance. He was charming. He was consistent. He remembered everything she told him and brought it back in conversation days later like a man who genuinely paid attention. Within 6 months, they were in a committed relationship, and Derek had begun, very quietly, restructuring the edges of her life. He suggested she move into his house to save money on rent. He offered to help her manage her finances since she was still learning American banking. He drove her to work because the commute was complicated and he wanted to spend the time with her. Every single one of those suggestions sounded, in the moment, like care. It was only when Renee tried to pull back, when she told him she wanted more independence, that something between them fell off, that she understood what those months had actually been. He told her he would contact her employer and report that she had been working outside the scope of her visa. He told her he had documentation. He told her that one phone call from him could end her legal right to remain in the United States, and that she would be on a plane back to Trinidad before her company could even process a termination. Renee did not know enough about visa law at the time to know whether any of that was true. What she knew was that she was alone in a city where every anchor she had, her housing, her transportation, her financial footing, ran through Derek Coleman. So she did what he had calculated she would do. She went quiet. She stopped pushing back. And 4 months later, when she had saved enough money to lease her own apartment and transfer her work sponsorship to a colleague's firm in Houston, she left in the middle of a Tuesday while Derek was at a showing. She told no one. She left no forwarding address. She simply disappeared, which is exactly the word Derek used when people asked where she had gone. She had never filed a police report. She had never told her employer the real reason she transferred. She had carried the weight of those 18 months alone for 6 years because she had convinced herself that without documentation, without proof, without anything more than her own memory of what it felt like to be controlled by a man who never once raised his hand, no one would believe her. What Sandra's colleague told Renee on that phone call was the same thing Sandra had told Amara, that her testimony was evidence, that a pattern across 2 women was a pattern. That VAWA did not require a police report. Under VAWA, survivors do not need to have reported abuse to police for eligibility. Evidence like medical records, statements from friends, counseling notes, letters from religious leaders, and even a survivor's own declaration may be enough to support a case. Renee agreed to provide a written affidavit. She wrote 11 pages. She did not leave anything out. The VAWA certified immigration attorney reviewing Amara's case, a woman named Patricia Osei, no relation, had been practicing immigration law in Atlanta for 19 years. She had seen the fraud claim Derek filed against Amara before she had seen anything else, and her first read of it told her something important. It was too clean, too detailed, too legally precise for a man who was simply a real estate agent reporting a bad marriage. She pulled his background. She found the records of his previous relationship through Renee's Houston work transfer filings. She found a 2019 complaint, never formally pursued, filed by a woman at Derek's church who had accused him of threatening behavior after she ended a brief relationship with him. None of it was enough on its own. But together with Renee's affidavit, Amara's own detailed declaration, Sandra's advocate documentation, and the immigration fraud claim Derek had filed, which Patricia argued in her legal brief was itself an act of coercive control designed to destabilize Amara's status. The picture that emerged was not of a man reporting a fraudulent marriage. It was of a man who had spent years selecting vulnerable women, building dependency, and then using the threat of legal and institutional consequence to keep them from ever speaking. Patricia filed Amara's VAWA I-360 self-petition on the 15th of January 2026. She filed it from the domestic violence shelter in Decatur, with Amara sitting across from her at a folding table in a room that smelled like institutional coffee and someone else's laundry. Amara was 36 weeks pregnant. She had been at the shelter for 9 days. She had arrived with her Jamaican passport, the immigration notice Derek had triggered, the ultrasound photo from her last appointment, and the VAWA paperwork she had started filling out on her own before she knew any of this was possible. Patricia looked at those half-completed forms and told Amara she had done more right than she knew. Under VAWA, extreme cruelty includes a pattern of behavior that creates a climate of fear and control. A survivor does not need to prove every form of abuse listed, only that such a pattern existed. Amara's declaration alone ran to 43 pages. She remembered everything. Every flat-toned threat at the kitchen sink. Every timed prenatal appointment. Every Sunday call home to her mother where she performed a life she was not living. She had been storing it all in silence for 18 months, and now she was putting it on the record, one page at a time, in a shelter room in Decatur, Georgia, with her daughter turning slow circles in her belly. 2 weeks after the petition was filed, Derek Coleman's attorney sent a letter to Patricia's office announcing that Derek intended to file for full custody of the child upon birth, citing Amara's. And these are the words from the letter: unstable immigration status and demonstrated lack of community ties in the United States. Patricia read that letter, set it face down on her desk, and called the Georgia Coalition's communications director. With Amara's full permission, they went public. Nadia Coleman was born on the 4th of March 2026 at Grady Memorial Hospital in Atlanta, Georgia. 7 pounds, 2 ounces, a full head of dark hair. She arrived at 6:47 in the morning, just as the sun was coming up over the city, and the first people to hear her cry were not a husband, not a grandmother, not a family gathered in a waiting room full of balloons and nervous energy. They were Sandra, the advocate who had taken Amara's call from a gas station payphone. Patricia, the attorney who had spent 19 years preparing for exactly this kind of case. And a shelter volunteer named Doris who had driven Amara to the hospital at 2 in the morning and held her hand through 8 hours of labor without ever once letting go. When the nurse asked Amara for her emergency contact, Amara did not hesitate. She gave them Sandra's name. The same question that had silenced her 3 months earlier now had an answer. That is what survival looks like from the inside. Not a dramatic escape. Not a single turning point. Just a name you can finally say out loud. Derek Coleman hired a family law attorney within 72 hours of Nadia's birth and filed a motion for emergency custody, arguing that Amara's immigration situation made her an unstable primary caregiver and that there was a credible risk she would flee the country with the child. The motion was denied. The judge, reviewing the VAWA petition filing, Patricia's legal brief, Renee's affidavit, and the documented history of Derek's coercive behavior found no credible evidence of flight risk and substantial evidence of a pattern of control. Derek was granted supervised visitation pending a full custody hearing scheduled for later in 2026. He has not been criminally charged. As of the time this video was produced, the custody case remains open. He is still a licensed real estate agent in Atlanta. He is still a deacon at his church, and he has still never, in any public or legal forum, acknowledged that anything he did to Amara Coleman or Renee Williams was wrong. Amara is currently living in transitional housing in DeKalb County. She returned to part-time nursing work 6 weeks after Nadia was born, placed through the same staffing agency that employed her before Derek cut her hours. Her VAWA self-petition is pending. Processing times for VAWA I-360 self-petitions currently run between 3.5 to 4 years for the majority of cases, according to 2026 USCIS data. That means Amara will spend the next several years in legal limbo, protected from deportation while her petition is active, but without the permanent status that would give her the full stability she and Nadia need. She knows this. She has accepted it the way you accept a long road after you have already decided you are going to walk it. Her mother in Kingston calls every Sunday. Amara answers every call, but she does not perform anymore. She just talks. Here is what this story is really about. It is not about one man in Atlanta. It is not even about one woman who survived him. There are thousands of women in the United States right now navigating the same legal trap: a conditional spousal visa, an abusive citizen spouse who controls the renewal process, and a system that was designed to protect marriage rather than the people inside it. Many of them do not know that VAWA exists. Many of them do not know that a phone call from a gas station payphone can be the first brick in a legal case. Many of them do not know that their testimony is evidence, that their memory is documentation, that the 43 pages of truth they have been carrying alone in their bodies can be put on the record and used to fight back. Derek Coleman understood the system. He used that knowledge as a weapon for years. The only reason Amara Coleman is in transitional housing in DeKalb County right now instead of on a plane back to Jamaica without her daughter is because one advocate answered the phone. One attorney had 19 years of experience and is sharp enough eye to see what a too-clean fraud claim really meant. One woman in Houston named Renee decided that 6 years of silence was enough. Think about that. Think about how thin the margin was. Think about how many Amaras there are who called and got a busy signal, who never found the pamphlet in the bottom of the paper bag, who never had a neighbor paying close enough attention to slip them a phone number. Think about how many directs are still out there, sitting in church pews and shaking hands at open houses and building their next case against their next carefully chosen person. And then ask yourself the question that has been sitting at the center of this story since the very first frame. A man filed a federal immigration claim against his pregnant wife to keep her from leaving him. He built a years-long pattern of control across multiple women. He has faced no criminal consequences. His license is intact. His reputation is intact. He is still in that city, right now, today. Is that justice? Because I want to know what you think. Drop your answer in the comments. I read every single one. Before you go, I want to ask you something directly. Was there a moment in Amara's story where you saw it coming before she did? Was there a red flag, something Derek said or did, that made you think, I would have caught that? Or does this story make you question how well any of us can actually see control when it is dressed up as care? Put it in the comments. Be specific, because the most powerful thing that happens in this comment section is not people agreeing with each other. It is people sharing what they noticed, what they lived, what they recognize. That is how stories like Amara's stop being just stories and start being warnings that actually reach the people who need them. If this video reached you today, the single most useful thing you can do in the next 10 seconds is hit that subscribe button. Not for me. For the next woman whose story we are going to tell. Because there is always a next one. There is always another case that deserves the kind of attention and care and detail that Amara's story got today. And the only way we can keep doing this work, the research, the sourcing, the hours it takes to tell a real story the right way, is if this community keeps growing. So subscribe. Share this with one person you think needs to see it. And leave Amara a word in the comments if this moved you, because she knows this video exists and she will read what you write. Now, I am going to tell you just enough about what is coming next to make sure you cannot stop thinking about it. There is a woman in this country who spent 11 years building a life, a career, a home, a family name she had earned through work and sacrifice, and the kind of quiet determination most people never see up close. And then, in a single evening, her husband used a legal instrument she did not know existed to transfer everything she had built into his name alone. Not through violence, not through a dramatic confrontation, through paperwork, through a system that allowed it, through the specific and calculated patience of a man who had been planning it for years while she was busy trusting him. That story is coming, and I promise you, you will not see the ending coming. Stay close,